Hi, I'm Phil Kurz, contributing editor at TV Tech Magazine and tvtech.com. We're here today to talk about ransomware attacks, data protection, and recovery. Ransomware attacks are a big problem that only continues to grow. The economic damage left in their wake is sizable. Projections for this year alone estimate ransomware attacks will cost their targets $57 billion. That includes ransom payments, recovery time, and downtime. Looked at another way, the average cost of one attack this year stands at $1.5 million. Here to discuss ransomware attacks and protection are Christopher Holmes, Vice President of Production at Alabama Public Television. His department suffered a ransomware attack, and he's here to tell us about that experience. Joining Christopher is Skip Levins, Head of Product Marketing, AI Strategy at Quantum, which is sponsoring today's webinar. Skip will talk about ransomware attacks and steps media organizations can take to protect themselves. A bit of housekeeping before we start. We'll be taking your questions throughout today's webinar. Please submit them using the Q&A tab in the upper right of the webinar interface. Also, you'll find links and other useful information under the Docs tab, and I encourage you to download them. With all that said, gentlemen, thanks for being here. Let's get started. So, Chris, why don't you set the stage for us? Tell us a lot about the Alabama Public Television ransomware attack that occurred in September 2022.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so in fact, I was out of town at a conference and got word one morning, I think it was, that basically they didn't know what was happening, but it appeared that our network had been taken over, and so they, unplugged the switch, the main switch from the ISP connection, and then sort of the work began on trying to figure out exactly what had occurred, how widespread it was, and kind of next steps. And I honestly had fairly recently kind of completed migrating us away from the old sort of juggling desktop hard drives to a proper sort of media management system, and I was in a little bit of a panic because suddenly my first fear was, well, now all of that stuff is in one easy to get to place. Right, there was some perceived safety before that in at least having a kind of a fragmented approach, though we had suffered many problems from that just with hard drive failures and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, Chris, which operations were affected? Did this get into your on-air operations being disrupted?
It did not get into our on-air operations per se. Fortunately, somebody was wise enough to set that operation up as a wholly separate network. It's a separate sort of incoming connection, separate set, whole set of IP addresses, etc. So it was a completely different thing. Now there was a little bit of impact because some of that system's kind of staged and recently played media had gotten disrupted, mostly because of configuration files that had gotten encrypted, not so much because of the media itself having been encrypted. But that particular system wasn't a huge concern because that really is essentially just a playout system. Yeah. So anything that exists there, unless it's airing in the next couple of hours, is really kind of transient material. It's certainly not the kind of the master source of that.
Right. And just to clarify, your operations, you want to tell us what your department focuses on and what was subject to this attack?
Yeah, so I oversee what essentially is our documentary division, And so we, we have been we had been at the time migrating away from desktop storage to a centralized media asset management system, multi-tiered storage with a MAM interface on top of that. And as I built that system out, then it made sense to start with any independent producers that we were working for, things that were not coming through kind of the national pipeline, so to speak, but more kind of local and regional independent producers. We also needed a way for them to deliver media to us, which then hit some automation on its way to that playout network. And then that was also the sort of the workflow and the kind of QC automation that our in-house finished masters went through on their way to broadcast as well. But the volume of it was, given that we're a statewide public television network, and my team in particular spends pretty much all of our production time out in the field, historical and cultural programming. We really consider the media that we capture to be a significant part of the kind of the cultural archive of our state. And so we've actually been doing a lot of work in sort of digitizing and preserving legacy media that we've had, but then certainly anything that we've been doing over my 17 years here as well has been moving into that. So it's a very precious collection of data for sure.
Right. Skip, from where you sit, are you hearing from more M&E organizations that are experiencing ransomware attacks?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's the history of it. I mean, you can kind of read it in Chris's experience. I mean, Chris is literally a wizard at making these kind of digital productions and bringing them to life and getting them to air. And it's I mean, in a perfect world, that's all he'd ever need to worry about. But increasingly, production itself gets really complex. It's multi-site, and then to really get more of the benefit, as Chris says, I want to reach back and digitize more, which means I need to store it in more places. And it is so now we're invoking different types of storage in one connected workflow. It's a lot of operations are consolidating. You need to be multi geographies, so everything gets more complex. There's pressure to sort of condense or put together operations, which kind of means, in the old days, there was always this front office, back office kind of mentality. Like, no, we're production. We're kind of a walled garden. And for in production houses, this was the case. Hard drives coming in were watched really carefully, and you don't pick up a USB stick on the street, and you don't use somebody else's cable. You don't know where it came from, that kind of thing. But as now front office and back office are kind of merged, then there's pressure to kind of let's connect these networks, and now there's more and more crossover points, and so yeah, there's more opportunity. So to answer your question, every industry has seen just a rapid increase in these kinds of attacks, and sadly, production has not been immune. Yeah.
Yeah, Skip, especially as relates to the media and entertainment industry, are the attack vectors similar from organization to organization, or are they diverse and really don't have any commonalities?
I mean, they're diverse. It actually, this is really interesting, and I think Chris's experience will bear this out, is that, the reason why you need special kind of storage for multiple editors to work on these huge files at the same time are probably not terribly attractive to, someone that gets access to a network and then maybe kind of looks around and says, oh, what's this content thingy? And oh, this thing is 20 gigs long. It's that's really hard to attack or encrypt. So the target space is different. But I mean, if we look and think about publicly reported sort of incidents, they could come in from the back office, the people selling ads, that sort of thing, and then someone gets in an organization and can then start, try to lock up these different things. So the attack surface is probably different, but everybody's vulnerable. Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone who's watching that if you have any questions, please submit them and we will weave them into our presentation today. Chris, you had mentioned that you had just transitioned sort of the storage architecture that you had to begin with into a more segmented storage approach, and also that may, I know in previous conversations you said that actually may have provided an element of protection for you, especially because you were using LTO tape for deeper archive. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's the terminology can, or at least my use of it can blur the lines a little bit. We were moving away from a segmented strategy, if you can call it that, is kind of the default mode of we need more storage, let's buy more hard drives. So that's what I mean by segmented. What we were moving to was a centralized system that was multi-tiered, which is another way of kind of saying segmented too, but it was all interconnected. And so that was where what kind of saved our bacon in this case. That system is not accessible from the wide area network. However, it sits on the same network as the rest of the office, and all it took was for one of the machines that had been sort of taken over to have the volume mounted that this network attached storage represented. But the good news, and Quantum was instrumental in the fact that this is the scenario that we had working for us, is that because it was multi-tiered, we had something like 200 terabytes of spinning disk storage, and then I think up to a petabyte of capacity in LTO tape. And our strategy, both to maintain available capacity in the faster spinning disk storage, but also for kind of long-term archival purposes, is that all media that came into the system was then copied, and in some cases copied to LTO tape and then removed from tier one, which is the spinning disk storage. Well, then our strategy there was that it was actually written to two tapes for redundancy. And then for every file that comes in, every time that file is accessed in some meaningful way, another version of that file gets written to tape. And so when this occurred, we had, a couple of things that were going for us were the sheer volume of data on that storage, and then B, the size of each given file, so that as their sort of encryption robot had crawled through our network, I think they completed all of the spreadsheets and Word documents that were on our network, and it was still, when it was discovered, it was still trying to crunch away on our media. And so because of that size and volume, they really only got through a relatively small amount of that media on that network attached storage. But even for that stuff, which is certainly, gave me a bit of a heart attack, the great thing was that we were able to just essentially replace the encrypted files with what was sitting safely on LTO tape. There were a couple of directories that had been encrypted, and then because the file changed, they got written to LTO tape. But we were able to just fall back from version 2 to version 1 on the tape and then restore, the unharmed version. So we would have been at a tragic loss of media. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of raw footage of active projects and all kinds of important, masters and everything else. And it would have been just a huge setback.
Wow.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for clarifying that, because when we were talking about segmented storage, I thought you were referring to tiers. So thanks for clarifying that. And so when you went about this process of sort of restoring, how long did it take you to be able to restore, to restore your content so that you could be up and running?
It took, it's been a few years now, so it's difficult to remember, but I'm thinking, well, as far as the decryption of any files, that actually took weeks. But in our case, that the rest of the organization kind of had to trudge through that. But in case of this particular data, it saved us so much time because,
Right.
encryption and decryption is not fast. So to be able to basically skip that step of decryption and just restore, man,
Right.
it was a matter of hours, really.
Yeah, right, exactly. So Skip, from a high level perspective, what are some of the major components of an effective cyber resiliency strategy so that you can either minimize or reduce the chance that you'll be subject to such an attack?
Yeah, that is a big question, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that Chris mentioned. So, in fact, here, maybe if you'll allow me to just throw up a slide. So quantum makes a lot of different types of technology, but what's important to us is the workflow, and we want to give people like Chris the ability to think in workflow. He's thinking in terms of productions. For example, he will bring these raw assets into something like StoreNext, and then when a project is finished, invoke StoreNext, archiving and policy tiers, and move a copy off to either something like object storage or tape. Now, StoreNext will leave a marker behind, so if you wish, you don't need to then go, try to figure out what's sitting on tape. You just look at the link in StoreNext and you say, oh, I want that, and you bring it all back. And then I should add that using different types of technology will give you some hardware attributes that you're not going to get from a simple, say, spinning disk. Object storage does erasure encoding across a wide area. Tape literally can be physically air gapped from the rest of the network. So if someone were to get access, and they wouldn't be able to reach those assets sitting on tape. And then I think Chris mentioned versioning too. That a lot of these tools will automatically version. There was a change, as Chris mentioned, so that triggered a version 2, but you can easily roll back to version 1. So, I mean, what we're getting at, this is definitely a layered approach. So cyber resilience is definitely not a one-shot kind of answer. I mean, it's almost an organizational level. It's almost benefits more from kind of training and familiarization, but also a sort of mindset. I will say that one of the best things you can do, because these assets Christopher is talking about, these are irreplaceable. I mean, for the mission that his team does, you can't replace some. I mean, these are culturally significant, pieces of content that can't be replaced. So, one of the cool things you can do is, as you're doing ingest, instead of sitting on multiple hard drives, we ingest into a common place. You can archive as you ingest. So it comes into working storage where you're working on a production. Archive a copy off to something like object storage or tape, and now you've got a digitized, safe copy that you can invoke and fall back to if you have to. So, but aside from that, yes, it's sort of weaving in these what if steps throughout the workflow and using the right technology for the need.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Skip. In as far as workflow, particularly in a media environment, um, we have that has all been automated so that,
Mhm.
as camera cards get dumped after a shoot, then our CAT-DV system and other servers will capture, ingest, put on that storage, catalog, and transcode various kinds of viewer kind of web
Yeah.
playable proxies and edit proxies. And so that has enabled us to be much more sort of resource efficient, and including enabling
Mm.
remote work more
That's right.
easily. And that also has an inherent sort of protection of the source media, because as soon as those edit proxies are created, then the full res source files then get cleared off once they're on LTO, just to keep our spinning disk capacity uh, open.
Yeah.
But there is an inherent sort of safety mechanism in that workflow as well.
That's smart. It's using all of those. I said it before. It's like technology should serve the workflow and the need, not the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chris, let's getting back to the actual attack for a moment. Can you tell us how Alabama Public Television responded to the attack? You discussed in detail about how your department could restore uh, all of this valuable content actually within a few hours. But overall, how did it affect Alabama Public Television?
Well, so we're very fortunate in the sense that this came in a period of time where there had been a rash of there was I don't know if it was one particular group or multiple that were targeting nonprofits and hospitals,
Wow.
organizations like that. And um, I don't know how long this had been in place, if it had been more than that current year or what, but somebody in our organization had the the good sense to get um, cybersecurity insurance in place.
Mm.
And so uh, once that, you know, once this was discovered, of course, somebody reached out to them, reached out to law enforcement, um, and the cybersecurity or the insurance company was able to sort of, I guess, put us in touch with a security firm to help us kind of navigate, um, you know, our way through, dealing with the threat actors, you know, figuring out how to convert, get the cash into Bitcoin, and they also were a hugely helpful resource in that. I mean, who wouldn't be lost in that scenario? And they were able to help us be comfortable and safe about all of these things that you feel very nervous, like this just feels very sketchy. Um,
Yeah.
and they were really able to kind of advise us. There was a negotiation that happened with the threat actors, and ultimately, because we had that insurance, we were able to pay the ransom. Um, that said, we learned through the process, and they pointed out to us that you know don't don't make too many assumptions about how uh, it's not always as simple as just if you can pony up the money, then you'll be okay, because they put a lot less. These groups put a lot less sort of care into their decryption tools than they put into their encryption tools and their kind of hacking prowess. Um, they also, part of the value of working with this company was that they kind of knew the field, they knew the active groups, and they were able to give us some sense of confidence about, well, this group relies on a reputation of decrypting people's files effectively, because if they don't, they're going to have a hard time, leveraging, a ransom against somebody else if the word gets out that you're going to pay the money but you're not going to get your data. So fortunately, the tool wasn't, didn't seem to be the most polished software, but it got the job done. If there were files lost, it was only a handful of Word documents or something like that. And I should say, just because of other processes and partnerships and business partners we had in place, no kind of sensitive personal data was on our network. All of our our membership oriented things, public records, etc., all resided with a third party service on their cloud or what have you. So we were about as fortunate as an organization could be in the course of this, and we're able to pretty much recover 100% with no real sort of public embarrassment or anything like that.
Yeah, when I was preparing for this call today, one of the articles was talking about how ransomware attacks have moved. They still are requiring or asking for ransom, but maybe it's not in the form of allowing you to decrypt the assets that they've encrypted, but they're looking for like embarrassing sorts of content that they can or information that they can exploit to continue these attacks. As they go down the road. It's just amazing.
This is wild because there were some famous kind of trailer house leaks back in the day, and like, how do you measure the cost of like, somebody saw a rough cut and now they have a terrible view of whatever big tentpole feature we're going to release this summer, and it's content is a continuous operation, and if that's disrupted and people are thinking about that instead of doing content, I mean, it's how do you measure reputation hit or downtime? Or thank goodness the threat actors actually made good, but yeah, once someone's been in your environment, like, can you trust? I mean, these numbers change all the time, but like maybe only 27% of organizations who paid ever got their data back. And by the way, any of these numbers, this is from a Microsoft Defense report, U.S. Government Accountability Office. What's not taken into account since then is the fact that everyone's heard about AI and vibe coding. Well, now you've got a legion of script kiddies vibe coding tools, and so their productivity, if you will, has gone up exponentially. And let's not even talk about social engineering, where they can impersonate anybody in your supply chain or your executive team. It's the threat has just gone up incredibly.
Remind our audience here that we will take your questions. So if you have any, please feel free to submit them, and I'll promptly ask our speakers today. So, Chris, why don't you? I understand there's sensitivity here, and you don't want to reveal everything. Obviously, you don't want to subject yourself to more attacks, but just in general, from a high level, could you talk about the IT department's response there at Alabama Public Television, and did they find some vulnerabilities that they were able to address, and is there any information you can share in that regard?
Yeah, immediately, the sort of the idea was close any doors, So, for example, I mentioned earlier that we had incorporated into these kind of media automation workflows the ability for our outside producers to deliver finished programs to us. At the time, that was an in-house FTP server. So we did away with that. We now use a cloud service, and we pull things down, and rather than things just showing up,
Yeah.
there are ways for us to sort of vet the data before it ever even enters our network. They began working to kind of restructure our network to be a little more segmented, so that it wasn't, once you're in, well, then you're just in. And then we, started making the investment into, actual kind of network-wide, organization-wide security monitoring software, and staff training, and all started basically availing ourselves of all possible means of sort of security improvement. Helping fight against the kind of the social hacking, helping fight against the technical and network hacking, and then just trying in every way possible to minimize potential ports of entry.
Yeah.
I was curious about something that Skip said earlier and what your reaction to that might be, Chris. And he was talking about that, if I understood what he was saying properly, that drive in the media and entertainment industry to meet deadlines. You have people who are focused on all manner of creative process, meet deadlines. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Skip, but basically what I think what you're saying is sometimes that might expose some vulnerabilities because they may miss some steps in securing their content, just to maintain the flow that's expected in their deadlines. First of all, I hope I characterized that properly, Skip. And then secondly, if I did, Chris, have you seen cultural sorts of changes as well to make, even though that may not have been a problem that you experienced, have you doubled down on trying to build that culture of protection, that culture of let's maximize our ability to keep our valuable assets secure?
Yeah. So I guess to answer that, yes, I mean, a certain amount is inherent in those of us who, we all have kind of had a kind of a trauma experience from the situation that inherently just makes everyone a little more cautious. Like anything else, though, I guess over time, that starts to kind of dissipate, which I think is where the continued training really comes into play. I have had instances, like everybody now is pretty well versed in recognizing, hey, we've got this email that purports to be from, the leadership of the organization, but it doesn't sound right or something. And so we'll communicate through other means to sort of say, hey, I got this email. Was that you? That type of thing. And in general, I think everybody, it's just like, wearing a seatbelt or anything else, before it happens to you, it's easy to think, oh, well, that's something that happens to other people. We're not on anybody's radar, but then once it happens, you're like, oh, this is a real thing. This is happening to everyone,
Yeah. In a way, it's kind of like the two worlds colliding, like the best practices learned on the enterprise side, and are kind of filtering across, and production can often just be controlled chaos. It's kind of like heroic efforts, get it ready, hand it off, for deadline. But sometimes that happens, but that never wants to be permanent. You want good process, and the kinds of things you do, when you're securing an enterprise, apply to content as well. I mean, of course, employee awareness and training, but just simple IT hygiene. No services on and wide open by default. Secure by default. patching and updating servers, no wide open anything left on the network, good role-based control, knowing, not wide open, sorts of access for everyone. And that will help limit or channel anyone getting into an organization and then sliding over to another part. But it really does take an overlapping sort of mindset. But kind of the biggest one, and I know there's rarely downtime, but kind of the biggest one is if you, where you can back up and preserve the original inputs into content, and one good example might be, say you're monetizing all your assets and you've got those on a server. Well, that would be a good target to actually back up and take snapshots periodically so you can bring it back online faster. And so whatever the enterprise-wide sort of backup plan or whatever your incident response plan is, and it may be, as Chris says, as simple as I'm going to unplug stuff from the network and so we can find out what the heck's going on. But it could also be, okay, we put a plan in place, but we don't know it's real until we test it. Let's actually try recovering something. There are many different layered sort of aspects to blending the best of the enterprise world and the content production world.
Chris, what lessons do you think Alabama Public Television learned from this experience?
Well, first of all, it can and will happen to you. But also, simply thinking to, a retail sort of cloud service like, Box, Dropbox, any of that kind of thing, in and of itself is not backup, because corrupted files can sync there too. Also, I think everybody, to your previous question about culture, I think everybody's become much more mindful about what kind of their own personal data they're keeping on, say, their work laptop or, anything like that. And, I guess like Skip was saying, the more sort of walls and moats that you can put in place, because it's not even about sort of preventing this from happening. It's about making it as difficult as possible when it does happen for, the threat actors to really just, consume all that you have, and to better enable your ability to recover. If our entire network had been situated in a manner similar to the way my team's media was, we wouldn't have even really had to pay a ransom, because we could have just restored and moved forward. So I think the big takeaway is it's a great idea to have some kind of insurance if you're able. Make it as hard as possible, knowing that they're out there and they're knocking at the door. Sooner or later, someone will find a way in. So then how much of a labyrinth can be there when they do get in, and how easy can you make it on yourself to restore without having to go through sort of the dark tunnels of, paying some shady character in Bitcoin.
Phil, this whole notion of insurance is really interesting, and every customer needs to decide for themselves, if they have a stance on it, like, will they use it, will they won't. But I will say that a lot of times when these insurance companies kind of look at your organization and building a policy with you, they're going to want to know things that Quantum, as the sort of platform technology provider, can help with. Like they say, if you're building a policy or a plan, I need 3 copies, 2 different types of media. One of them has to be offline, one has to be air gap. Cool, we can show you exactly how to do that. And then if the bell goes off, then we can also swing into action too, because we'll help with everything from monitoring to be on call, et cetera. So Yeah, that's a really interesting facet of building a solution to
Well,
this stuff.
and you raise a good point, Skip, in that because, in order to procure that insurance,
Mm,
um, there was vetting that they did
that's
to,
interesting.
with respect to our network and our practices. So it's not like we were just, very, casual about it.
Mm,
Um, but and then of course, once, like with any insurance, once a thing like this occurs, then of course the premium goes up, because now it
mm,
seems more likely that it'll happen again, even though we've certainly hardened things to yet another level. But if nothing else, that process of sort of being kind of certified to the satisfaction of a would-be insurer, in and of itself, is a fairly valuable kind of process to help sort of try and vet your situation.
This is for either one of you. Does an effective plan for an organization, a media organization, looking at this, uh, concentrate solely on vulnerabilities, or is there some planning that can be done in terms of restoration to make recovery easier should you be subject to an attack? Beforehand, prior, planning. Skip, any
Yeah, I
thoughts
mean,
about that?
I'm sure.
Or Chris?
Well, I'm sure Skip has a lot of good info there, but I will say, plan as if it is a certainty.
yeah,
And then from there, okay, well, what would we do? Certainly the ability, having essentially what amounts to offline backups
yeah,
is the most fundamental way to go, for efficiency, for probably cost. Obviously, there's going to be some investment on the front end, depending on the scale of data that you're talking about. But um, that would be my answer.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you can architect it in a way where you may have, say, I mean, just kind of broadly, a copy on tape and a copy on something like object storage. Well, if you need to retrieve one from either of those, you've got more options, and options are a very good thing to have when when the bell does go off. Absolutely.
And to that point, you know, these are the same protections that are very useful to have in place when
Mm,
it doesn't involve bad guys.
yeah.
Files get corrupted, things get accidentally deleted,
Yes.
stuff happens, and these are the same things that can kind of save your hiney in those cases too.
Right. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Skip, what is quantum DXI and what is its purpose?
Ah, okay. Well, let's see. Um, so quantum makes a few things. Now these are traditionally DXI. For example, is traditionally used more commonly in the enterprise side, where you have a very focused, valuable point, like say an application server, something that powers the whole business. Well, it's a simple, fast, dedicated backup appliance. And you can stream files to it very, very quickly. It automatically will dedupe in line, and you can then move those off to other places. But what's kind of interesting is that it can be this sort of backup sort of gateway that can accelerate out or fan out to other types of technology, object storage or tape. So it's a really interesting option. I would say content servers, monetization servers, app servers would be a really good candidate for that. But that's essentially what it is. It's a dedicated, very simple in mission, very fast, and actually pretty dang dense chunk of storage. You can think of it as an accelerated backup appliance. So there you go. Good question.
Uh, Chris, now, obviously you've looked at this from Alabama Public Television's point of view, but if you could offer your peers who are watching today some tips and things to think about when it comes to ransomware and recovering from ransomware attacks, what do you suggest?
Uh, I guess a lot of the things that I've described along the way, just be very aware of, sort of what ports you're opening, so to speak, um, and um, you know, know that this is not just a random shot in the dark. Sooner or later, this is going to happen. So the more you can do to sort of help, protect against it, um, the better. And to me, that is outward looking and inward looking. Outward looking in terms of just trying to harden your network, but inward looking in terms of making sure that you have the redundancies and the essentially the backups that enable you to recover quickly.
Yeah.
So, Skip, Chris mentioned that one of the steps they took following the attack was to replace that FTP server with a kind of a cloud service for the contribution from their, the various content producers that they work with to get to move content into Alabama Public Television. But I was wondering, is there a role for the cloud in restoration? Disaster recovery or something along those lines, mirroring content in the cloud, or what is the proper role for the cloud?
It's let's see. I just so happen to have it's so yeah. The cloud is incredible infrastructure that you should be able to tap again to serve your workflow. A lot of times in deadline sensitive kind of production, there's a tremendous amount of value in going very, very fast, very low latency, extreme level of control over your environment in something like a production studio, post house, where we do key animation and that sort of thing. And that can be extended out to people outside of your environment. So that FTP server could just as well be, it could be an SMB or an NFS share that people can hit remotely. But increasingly, as there has been all this consolidation, you can use cloud as sort of your backplane to either have a copy of content, so you got a third copy in cloud, but you can also use it as this sort of content backplane to sync across multiple sites. StorNext and Myriad in particular are really good at that. So you get the benefit of this public cloud investment and infrastructure that you can scale up, if you really need it in a hurry, but otherwise keep that advantage of going really fast and have extreme levels of control and network insight on site. So some people will tell you only do it on premise. Okay, but there are benefits of cloud that you could be leaving on the table, and the reverse is true. People will say, "I'm going to do everything in the cloud." It says, "Well, that's a lot of complexity, and frankly, a lot of production. There's a lot of value in being able to see and touch, your own hardware and really precisely control how you're producing that content."
So let's go to our first question from our audience, and I'm guessing this is directed at you, Skip. How is Quantum Solution different from Veeam or Commvault? I understand that Microsoft offers a lot of baseline security for Windows Server or Azure, and then there are a number of backup retrieval providers. I'm trying to understand how Quantum fits into the equation.
Yeah, a fair question. So let me throw this one up. I think probably the simplest way is to describe it is Quantum in and of itself is not the backup software that each customer for various reasons have their sort of go-to backup software that they like to use. And it really could be any of those. You're going to capture it and use it, and Quantum will be the target for that helps pull together all of that. So if short answer is if you have Veeam or Commvault, we're certified for both of those, and we'll just make it work better. Hopefully that's not too short of an answer.
No, that's fine. Now this question is interesting, but I don't know if we're the right people to address it, but maybe we are. What is the relationship between intellectual property rights and an individual's right to their personal data within a piece of creative work? Chris, I guess that would fall squarely in your lap. Any thoughts?
Um, uh, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I completely really grasp the question. Um, we are we tend to be fairly self-contained with respect to that, and so fortunately, that's not something that we have to grapple with a whole lot. One maybe expression that I can think of that maybe that question gets to is sort of the difference between sort of you know a kind of a program, content organizations rights regarding, say, the series or the program versus, say, somebody who was on the producing team's right to be able to use it for, say, a reel or something like that. Um, in general, I think that is if that's even the nature of the question, that is, I think, a widely accepted uh, practice, that you allow the folks who create the content to be able to showcase that content to further their own careers, etc. But I apologize if I'm misinterpreting the question.
Well, thanks you. Thanks for the interpretation because I wasn't quite sure where it was going either. But thank you. Hey, Skip. How do compliance demands with regulations like General Data Protection Regulations (GDPR) factor into restoration?
Um, let's see. Well, I think, well, so let's just say, and maybe this even touches on the question that sort of what an organization stores, what their mission is usually guided by regulations, sort of what you may keep, what, your responsibility is to safeguard that information. So, and I think a lot of this plays into what you can demonstrate. Demonstrate that you are putting in place those procedures, and it's different in almost every region. If I mean, if you're crossing from, say, the states to the EU, there's another set of regulations and compliance to conform with. But the short answer is that's something each organization has to know. I mean, this is a really important part of the strategy they put in place to store, manage, and protect and demonstrate that they do all those things. So it's yeah. Sorry if that wasn't a really direct answer, but it depends. So it's a little bit different, but yeah, having a good platform, being able to demonstrate like, yep, data comes in here, it's protected here, it's kept in 3 different spots, it's on 2 different pieces of media, that copy's offline, and if something happens, here's how we're going to respond to it. I mean, that goes a long way to answering those questions. Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of our time, but we have enough time for a few final thoughts by both of our speakers. Why don't we start with you, Skip?
Oh, okay. One, it's an absolute honor to work with customers like Chris. And the we love building workflow tools that help his vision. And yeah, I mean, having anything like this happen to an organization is kind of a terrible time. And we look forward to being a partner. And if any of this happens to other customers, workflow first, technology second is how we like to think.
Chris, final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, guard your data. It is particularly in the content business. The media is our media. That's what we're doing. And for us, in terms of what occurred, it's all important to those of us who make it, but we feel kind of an institutional sort of stewardship towards this media that we're capturing. We create these programs and documentaries, but we often regard the programs and documentaries themselves to be sort of the means by which, the justification for having captured a much wider amount of stuff for kind of the long-term use and kind of cultural preservation. So just be aware that it's one thing to manage directories full of text files and spreadsheets. It's quite another to manage terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of your most precious media. If you're a carpenter and somebody comes along and burns up all your wood and steals all your tools, it's going to be a hard situation, and that's basically how the media is for us.
Thanks. Well, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank our panelists, Christopher Holmes and Skip Levins, for sharing their insights on ransomware and restoration. I also want to thank you for attending and remind you to download the resources our panelists have shared. Finally, I'd also like to remind you to visit tvtech.com and find my latest articles and those of my colleagues. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.